The silence before the storm. The stars hung still in the void, distant and indifferent, a silent audience to the machinations of war. Across the cold reaches of space, fleets clashed, planets burned, and civilizations trembled. Yet, in the vast chamber of the Galactic Council, where words had once carried more weight than weapons, silence reigned, a silence thick with fear. For centuries, the Council had maintained a fragile balance among the starfaring races, a balance built on diplomacy, treaties, and the unspoken understanding that no one species should dominate the others. Conflicts had flared before, but they had always been contained, managed through negotiation, or, at worst, sanctioned battles with rules and regulations. But the Korthan Empire had shattered that illusion. The Korthans were not like the others, a warlike species of towering reptilian warriors, bred for combat and conditioned for conquest. They did not recognize the Council's authority. They did not negotiate, they did not honor treaties, and they certainly did not care for the bureaucratic posturing of weaker species. They had moved through the outer systems with terrifying speed, crushing all who stood in their way. Now, in the grand chamber where the leaders of 100 civilizations once debated matters of galactic law, the remaining delegates sat in stunned silence, their numbers far smaller than before. Planets had fallen. Armies had been wiped out before they could even mobilize. The Korthans had dismantled the old order with ruthless efficiency. The Council, for all its power, was powerless. Then the humans arrived. It had been a matter of great debate whether humanity should be allowed into the Galactic Council at all. They were new to the stars, still finding their place in the grand cosmic dance. Other species had advanced over millennia, perfecting their technologies, their societies, their philosophies. Humanity, by contrast, was reckless, unpredictable, and dangerously ambitious. They had expanded faster than any species before them, colonizing hostile worlds with relentless determination. They adapted to environments no others would dare settle. Where other races built civilizations slowly, cautiously, humans burned through their limits like wildfire. Most in the Council had underestimated them. Now, they were the last hope. A section of the chamber had been reserved for the human delegation, though no one had seen them enter. They had not spoken during the desperate debates of the past weeks, when the remaining species had begged for a solution that did not exist. Some had assumed the humans had given up and left. Others had whispered that perhaps they had never been serious about their place in the Council at all. Then, a voice broke the silence. "We'll handle it." It was not loud, nor was it particularly aggressive. But it carried weight. A stillness fell over the chamber as heads turned toward the human delegation. The speaker was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a simple, dark uniform devoid of the elaborate insignias worn by other species diplomats. His features were weathered, sharp, his eyes cold and calculating. He did not sit on the elevated platforms where the others spoke down to their audiences. He stood, level with them all, as if he had nothing to prove. The Korthan delegate, a monstrous being clad in dark battle armor, let out a guttural laugh. "Handle it," he sneered. "You have no fleets capable of standing against us. Your species has barely scratched the surface of interstellar warfare. Your worlds will be the next to burn." The human did not react. His expression remained unreadable. His voice did not waver. "You assume we'll fight the way you expect." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The Korthans had won every battle not because of their superior numbers, though they were vast, but because they fought without the hesitation, without the restrictions that bound the other species to their traditions. They struck first, they struck hard, and they did not stop. It had been an unstoppable strategy against civilizations that still clung to outdated codes of war. But something in the human's words gave even the Korthan delegate pause. One of the few remaining council members, a frail-looking being with translucent skin and wide dark eyes, cleared his throat. "You speak boldly, human," he said, "but we have seen what happens to those who challenge the Korthans. We have lost fleets, armies, entire worlds. What makes you different?" The human smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the kind of smile that sent a chill through the room. "We don't fight fair." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, an expression of uncertainty flickered across the Corthan delegate's scared face. For all their brutality, the Corthans fought with honor. It was a savage honor, but it was a code nonetheless. They did not use deception. They did not strike from the shadows. They did not employ tactics that were considered dishonorable. Humans, on the other hand, had never played by the rules. There were no cheers, no grand proclamations. Humanity did not ask for the Council's approval. They did not beg for allies. They did not waste time with formalities. They simply stood. And then, without another word, they walked out of the chamber. The war was about to change, because humanity had just decided to play. And when humans played war, they played to win. The rules of war just change. The Corthan warships hovered like titanic predators over the smoldering remnants of the outer colonies. Their hulls, scared from battle yet still imposing, gleamed under the cold light of distant stars. Entire planets had fallen, their defenses crushed with brutal efficiency. The Galactic Council had been powerless to stop them. From orbit, the Corthan Supreme Commander, Veraka, watched the devastation unfold on his holo display. He was ancient by his species' standards, his battle-scarred scales proof of victories won across centuries. There was no honor in crushing the weak, but war was war. The strong ruled, and the weak perished. That was the way of the galaxy. But something gnawed at him. The humans. He had watched them in the council chamber. He had seen species beg, negotiate, and die for mercy. But the humans had done none of these things. They had not pleaded, nor had they postured. They had simply left. And that was troubling. The Corthans had spent years studying their enemies. The Orlans fought with disciplined formations. The Velari relied on overwhelming firepower. The Xothan clans used swarm tactics to overwhelm their foes. Every species had a pattern, a methodology, a doctrine of war that could be countered. But the humans, they had no pattern. They had arrived late on the galactic stage, and the few encounters the Corthans had with them had been strange. Their ships were outdated. Their weapons were primitive by galactic standards. And yet, in skirmishes, they had fought like cornered beasts. No sense of order. No grand strategy. Just pure, unrelenting, unpredictable brutality. This was why Veraka hesitated. He had fought many wars. But there was one truth in battle. An enemy you do not understand is the most dangerous kind. And the humans. They were an enigma. His thoughts were interrupted by an incoming transmission. One of his commanders appeared on the screen, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "Supreme Commander, we have lost contact with 3 forward outposts on the Velari border." Veraka frowned. Lost contact? How? The commander hesitated. "We do not know." One moment, they were reporting standard patrols. The next, nothing. That was impossible. Corthan outposts were fortified. Their communications were secured with encrypted channels. A single station falling silent was an anomaly. 3. It was the humans. Veraka's mandibles tightened. "Mobilize a fleet. I want eyes on those outposts now." The commander saluted and the transmission cut. For the first time in years, Veraka felt something he had not felt in a long time. Uncertainty. The first strike. Out in the void, beyond the reach of Corthan sensors, a single human warship drifted in the darkness. Unlike the massive, heavily armed cruisers of the Galactic Council, this vessel was small, sleek, and almost unassuming. But its crew knew the truth. The UNS Phantom was no ordinary warship. It had been built in secret, away from the prying eyes of the Council. Its systems were unconventional, its technology cobbled together from salvaged alien advancements and brutal human ingenuity. It wasn't designed to win open battles. It was designed to make sure the enemy never even saw the attack coming. On the bridge, Captain Elias Work watched the data feed streaming in from their most recent mission. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the holographic interface. 3 Corthan outposts had been destroyed in under an hour. The Corthans would never know what hit them. A junior officer spoke up, her voice laced with tension. "Sir, enemy fleet is moving toward the last known location of Outpost Theta 9. Looks like they're reacting." Rourke smirked. "Good. Let's see how well they handle playing on our terms." Unlike the Council species, humanity did not fight like soldiers on a chessboard. They did not announce their movements or engage in staged battles. Humanity fought like wolves in the night, striking fast, striking hard, and vanishing before the enemy even knew they were there. And if the Corthans thought they could predict human warfare, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The hunt begins. The Corthan fleet arrived at the last known coordinates of Outpost Theta 9. Their formation tight, their weapons primed. There was nothing there. No debris. No distress signals. Just empty space. Veraka, watching from his flagship, narrowed his eyes. Something was wrong. Before he could issue new orders, a series of explosions erupted across the fleet. Not direct hits, but well-placed detonations that disabled shield generators, knocked out key weapon systems, and disrupted coordination. And then the humans struck. From the darkness, barely detectable on sensors, human strike craft emerged. They did not engage in a direct assault. Instead, they targeted the fleet's supply ships, their command relays, their escape routes. The Corthan fleet tried to react, but by the time they adjusted, the humans had already disappeared. This was not war as the Corthans understood it. This was something else. Veraka slammed his fist into the armrest of his command throne. Find them. Find them now. But there was nothing to find. The humans were gone. And for the first time since the war began, the Corthans were afraid. Shadows in the void. The Corthan fleet drifted in the wreckage of its own failure. Fire and debris littered the cold vacuum of space, the remnants of vessels that had been cut down before they could even react. Across the battered formations, commanders barked orders, trying desperately to reestablish control, to form ranks, to make sense of an enemy they could not see. But there was no logic to what had just happened. No warnings, no demands, no honorable battle formations. The humans had not engaged in combat the way civilized species did. They had not sent a declaration of war. They had not issued challenges. They had hunted, and they had vanished before the Corthans even understood what was happening. On the Warbringer, Veraka's claws curled into the armrests of his command throne. His eyes locked onto the tactical displays that told him nothing. Every protocol, every strategy, every rule of engagement he had used to crush countless enemies had been rendered meaningless in an instant. His fleet had been ambushed. No, worse than that. His fleet had been played with. This was not how war was fought. The Corthans had battled for dominance across entire star systems for generations. They knew war. They understood war. It was about force, about strategy, about raw, undeniable power. But the humans had no interest in power. They had only one goal: destruction. Veraka turned to his second-in-command, a hardened warrior named Rektal, who stood motionless, his usually fearless demeanor now shaken. "We will track them," Veraka said, his voice measured, seething. "Every ship, every movement. The humans cannot hide forever." Rektal hesitated. "Sir, what if they are already ahead of us?" Veraka froze. It was a thought he did not want to consider, that they weren't reacting to the humans. The humans were leading them. Unseen war. Light years away, aboard the UNS Revenant, Captain Elias Work leaned forward, his fingers tapping against the holo interface as the latest updates flickered across the display. The Corthans were exactly where he wanted them to be. The attack had not been about wiping them out. That would come later. This was about fear. Make the enemy doubt themselves. Make them question everything they thought they knew about war. keep them off balance, make them afraid to move. And it was working. "Latest recon confirms Corthan fleet movements," said Lieutenant Cade, his voice calm but focused. "They're pulling back from the inner colonies. Looks like they're reinforcing their supply lines." Rourke smirked. "They're learning. That's cute." Lieutenant Reyna shook her head. "They still don't understand, do they?" "No," Rourke said. "They don't. The Corthans were trying to adapt, trying to move like humans, but they weren't built for it. They had spent too many centuries fighting predictable wars, following predictable rules. Now they were being forced to react to an enemy that didn't play fair." Rourke stood up, rolling his shoulders. "They're trying to cover their supply lines," he said. "So we hit them somewhere else. Hit them where they feel safe." A ripple of amusement moved through the bridge crew. There was nowhere the Corthans were safe anymore. The war had changed, and now it belonged to humanity. The ghosts of war. The Corthans had once believed their homeworld to be untouchable. They had spread terror across the stars for centuries, their empire expanding relentlessly, consuming anything in its path. Their home system, Corthus Prime, was a fortress, a system lined with war stations, defense fleets, planetary shields. Now it was time to bring it home. No species had ever dared approach it. Until now. Deep in the void, far beyond the range of Corthan scanners, a lone human fleet lurked. It was not large by galactic standards. It did not carry the overwhelming firepower of a full-scale invasion force. Because that was not how humans fought. The Black Spear Task Force was something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. A fleet of shadows, a weapon forged not in brute strength, but in cunning. And their mission? To break the Corthans before they even knew they were at war. Aboard the UNS Phantom, Major Jack Graves watched as data poured in from their infiltrator drones. Hundreds of thousands of signals scattered across Corthus Prime's defenses. Communications traffic, security protocols, fleet assignments. It was all so predictable. "We're tapped into their relay stations," said Specialist Nia Park, her fingers dancing over the holo controls. "They still think we're operating on the outer colonies." Graves grinned. "Good. Let's keep them thinking that." The war had been fought in space for too long. Now, the fall of Corthus Prime. The first sign of the attack came in the form of silence. Across Corthus Prime's orbital stations, defense operators blinked in confusion as their security feeds flickered. Weapon systems shut down. Fleet command signals were scrambled. And then the explosions began. They were not massive, planet-shattering blasts. They did not announce themselves with fire and destruction. No, they were surgical. Communications hubs, shield generators, power conduits. Within minutes, the planet's defenses were blind. Corthan generals scrambled for answers, barking orders into dead comm channels. Their fleet, still reorganizing after the ambush at the outer colonies, was nowhere near prepared for an attack on their homeworld. And then the human ships appeared, not in massive battle formations, not in grand fleets that could be tracked and countered. They came in waves, darting through the gaps in the Corthan defenses, striking and vanishing before the defenders could react. Corthan ground forces prepared for an invasion. They fortified their bunkers, activated their planetary defense grids, but the humans never landed. They didn't need to. By the time the Corthans realized what was happening, it was already over. Their power grids collapsed. Their fleet command crumbled. Their supply lines vanished. The war was no longer about battles. The war was about control. And the humans had just taken it. A new kind of war. As Corthus Prime burned in the wake of human precision strikes, Viraka stood in stunned silence aboard his flagship. This was not war. This was something else. His empire was not being fought. It was being dismantled. Piece by piece. And for the first time in his long, battle-hardened life, Viraka understood something terrible. The humans were not fighting to win. They were fighting to end him. And they would not stop. Not until every last Corthan was ash. The death of an empire. The Korthan High Command had never known fear. For centuries, their rule had been absolute. Their fleets had burned entire civilizations to the ground. Their warriors had crushed armies without mercy. The galaxy had learned to bow to the Korthans, to offer tribute or face annihilation. But now, for the first time in their history, the Korthans were not the hunters. They were the hunted. Across their empire, vital relay stations had gone dark. Supply chains had collapsed. Entire fleets had been torn apart by an enemy that did not fight by the rules of war. Korthan warlords, once untouchable in their fortresses, had been eliminated before they even knew they were targets. The Korthan war machine was breaking. And the humans had only just begun. The strike that changed everything. On the war-ravaged surface of Korthus Prime, Supreme Commander Varakka stood in the central war chamber, his claws curled into the cold metal of his command table. His eyes burned with rage as he watched the latest reports coming in. Another fleet had been lost. Another supply depot had been erased. Another warlord had been assassinated in his own stronghold. "This is not possible," he growled, his deep voice echoing across the chamber. "No species fights like this. No species would dare." Rektal, his second in command, hesitated before speaking. "They do not fight for territory. They do not even fight for victory. They fight to make sure we never rise again." Varakka's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Then let them come. Let them face us on the battlefield like warriors." Rektal hesitated again, and that hesitation sent a chill through Varakka's hardened soul. "Supreme Commander," Rektal spoke carefully, as if fearing the words himself. "There is no battlefield." Varakka's eyes narrowed. "There is no front line," Rektal continued. "There is no fleet engagement. They do not fight us where we are strong. They do not engage us where we are prepared. They strike, and then they vanish." Varakka slammed his fist onto the table, cracking the surface. "Then find them. Track them. Burn their worlds to the ground." Rektal's expression darkened. "We can't." Varakka froze. "What do you mean, we can't?" Rektal inhaled slowly, the weight of his words heavy. "We do not know where they are." And that was the truth that shattered the Korthan war effort. In every war they had fought, the Korthans had always known their enemy's location. They had always marched forward, meeting their foes in glorious battle. The enemy's fleets, the enemy's armies, they had always been visible. But now, the Korthans were fighting shadows. Every intelligence report was outdated the moment it arrived. Every fleet that moved to counterattack found only empty space. Every attempt to locate a human stronghold ended in failure. The humans had no homeworlds to conquer, no fortresses to besiege. They had made the entire galaxy their battlefield. And the Korthans had no idea how to fight that kind of war. The fall of the unbreakable. High above Korthus Prime, the remnants of the once mighty Korthan fleet floated in defensive formation. They had gathered every warship they could, every dreadnought, every battleship. The humans had humiliated them in the shadows, but if they dared show themselves in open combat, the Korthans would obliterate them. That was the hope. But hope was a fragile thing. And the humans were very, very good at breaking things. The first strike was not a barrage of plasma fire. It was not a massive fleet charging headlong into battle. It was silence. Then, one by one, the Korthan ships disappeared from the fleet's communication network. At first, the Korthans thought it was interference, a malfunction, a glitch in the system. But then the missing ship's emergency beacons began to blink offline. And then the wreckage began to drift into view. Charred hulls, torn apart vessels, entire warships that had been cut apart before they could even react. Panic spread through the fleet. Commanders barked orders, but there was no enemy to engage. There was no visible assault, because the humans were already inside. Across the warships, Korthan soldiers were dying in the dark. Human strike teams had infiltrated the fleet, moving through the ventilation shafts, hacking into security systems, sabotaging life support. This was not war. This was a slaughter. And when the first human warships finally revealed themselves on the horizon, the Korthans had already lost. The end of Korthus Prime. The human fleet was small. By all galactic standards, it should have been insignificant. But the moment they opened fire, the battle was already over. The Korthan fleet tried to respond. They fired blind, their weapons lashing out in every direction, desperate to hit something, anything. But there was nothing to hit. The humans were too fast, too precise. Every human missile found its mark. Every railgun round tore through Korthan defenses like paper. And then, in one final act of brutality, the humans deployed their last weapon. A single mass driver round, launched from orbit. The Korthans saw it coming. They watched as it entered the atmosphere. They watched as it fell. It was not a nuclear warhead. It was not a superweapon. It was simply a block of dense, reinforced metal, fired at an impossible speed. And when it hit, Korthus Prime cracked open like an egg. The impact sent shockwaves across the planet, turning entire cities into rubble. The tectonic plates shattered, causing earthquakes so powerful they could be felt from orbit. Firestorms erupted across the surface, and then the atmosphere itself collapsed, turning the planet into a choked, burning wasteland. The cradle of the Korthan Empire, the world that had stood for thousands of years, the seat of their dominance. Gone. A message to the galaxy. The surviving Korthan warlords, those who had not been erased, sent a desperate transmission to the Galactic Council. "We surrender," they pleaded. "The war is over." But the humans never responded. The transmission was met with silence. Because for humanity, this was never about peace. It was never about surrender. The Korthans had waged war on the galaxy for generations. They had shown no mercy. And now, for the first time, they were on the receiving end of it. Humanity had a message for the stars, and they had written it in fire.